I'm going to ask Kieran just to say a few words really in summary of today, and then we'll open it again for some questions, some comments, some thoughts. Thanks, Kieran.
Okay, thanks for that, Dawn. And listen, we're not going to artificially prolong this, but we did think it was important that, the whole raison d'etre for this project is for us as academics, in partnership with Healing to Remembering, to try to help people in civil society in Northern Ireland to have this difficult conversation. I personally have been very pleased, to echo the comments Paul McGeehan made in the last session, just about the tone of the conversation. It's been a very measured and respectful conversation. These are difficult issues, but our job in this project is to basically help people have that conversation and to bring whatever research skills or experience we have to those conversations. So to reiterate the offer that Louise made in her own session, if you're a member of an organisation and you think your own members might like to hear about the project or to hear about some particular theme of the project, or you want us to come out and meet you on a private basis or do public events or whatever, this project has another 6 months roughly to run. And we will do it basically. If you ask us to do it, we'll facilitate that. So in this session, I'm conscious as well that we didn't give you an opportunity to ask questions or ask for points of information from Louise's introductory paper. So if anybody's been sitting on a comment or a question on that, now's the time. If there are other issues that have come up, been flagged for you from the other speakers, or if you just want to get your speak in, now's the time. So we'll open up to the floor, and if our helpers can rotate. Okay, I've got one here, Bill Rolson at the back. We've got a mic floating there, folks, yeah? Do we have a floating mic? Did someone run off with the floating mic? There's one here, Rachel, and then there's one at the back there now. Just this table here, this chap here.
Hi, my name's Paul Gallagher. I just wanted to ask Louise, she spoke about the amnesties and precedents for amnesties, and one that was the 1969 amnesty, and it was sort of on a current topic as well. See, that amnesty was between October 68 and May 69, and it was about civil unrest and political protests and marches and things like that. And maybe in the context of the flag protests at the minute, would there be, especially with the amount of young people getting caught up in it from depraved areas, and how it's really going to affect their lives that get put through the criminal justice system? And would there be an opinion maybe from the panel, would be a call for an amnesty for a lot of those people?
Okay, I think we'll take a couple. Bill, was that you? Yeah.
Yes, Kieran, thank you. Bill Rolston. This is a general comment on just a feeling I have in the course of the day, and no disrespect to the specifics of your project, but the themes have been so common to so many such days that we've had. And I thought what was very interesting about today, that was a little bit unique, was that this is how silos, that people referred to a few times there, this is how silos look in action. Some people were asking questions and the answers were, well, I can't answer that, that's not my brief. And I'm not criticising that, that's absolutely fair, that was the correct answer most of the time. But it leads to a sort of sense of frustration that, where do these bits get joined up? And a few people today, this morning and this afternoon, suggested that how they get joined up is through some sort of truth recovery mechanism. And in fact, a few people also referred to the tragedy of Eames Bradley not being given serious enough thought. It's a pity that our dignitaries, with due respect to everybody up there, are gone. But I'd love to sort of ask John Larkin and Barry McGrory and everybody else, in fact, look, what are the odds if one of us organised a campaign, a sort of practical agitational campaign, bring back Eames Bradley? Would they sign up to it? Would they feel that they were compromised in somehow saying, going beyond the statement of saying, look, I know there are problems with just having my gaze solely in this direction, I can't act outside this, but I would actually think that we need some truth recovery mechanism. I'd love to see, basically I suppose what I'm saying, just to finish, is that we do come round to this point almost every time at these debates. And we'll go away till the next time somebody says, wouldn't it be a good idea to resurrect Eames Bradley? I'd love somebody to tell me, How the heck do we do that?
Any other comments or questions, sir? Just over here.
Hello, thank you. I'd just like to reiterate the usefulness of today, and many thanks to the panel for their thoughtful comments and certainly their input. Just a question or a general observation. We were given figures earlier on by one of the commentators with regards to who murdered who during the Troubles. And it appears certainly there was over 2,000 killed by the terrorist, the non-state, and 303 by the state. However, that figure, if collusion is taken into it, obviously there's a massive grey area there. I would certainly like to see some process where everyone's held to account. The state's a very powerful actor, and when they go wrong, they need to be held to account. That's what goes without saying. However, there seems to be a sort of plethora of cases. We're sort of going into like a vacuum where the non-state has been charged of killing, of murdering. However, there's no mechanism to sort of scrutinise the deal and to look into them. That's just my comment, and I appreciate some answer.
Should we have a stab at some answers here? I'm happy to take the last one.
Okay. So I'll respond to polls, I guess.
Yeah, okay.
On the first question about amnesties for civil unrest in 1969 and the recent flag protests, I guess I'm going to skirt around the issue in that I guess our goal with the project is not to say we think an amnesty is a good idea in particular contexts, but to provide information for informed debate for other people to make the decisions. On the issue about whether it would be possible to have an amnesty for that, I think it would. It wouldn't be in violation of any European Convention on Human Rights norms. On why we tend to introduce amnesties, they tend to be used in Northern Ireland and in other countries not to benefit individual offenders, but to achieve broader social goals. So be that quelling civil unrest or encouraging disarmament, facilitating peace agreements. And so I think if any discussion about whether an amnesty should be introduced for those crimes should have something broader behind it. Thanks.
Dawn, you've probably got the most political experience at this panel, so do you want to have a go at Bill's about how we lobby for
I'm dodging political questions. No, I think Louise is right in terms of the use of a political amnesty, if you like. But I see it in a broader sense and not just in terms of a flags protest, because I think the flags protest and some of the civil unrest that we've seen very recently are again tied into this bigger issue of how we deal with our past in Northern Ireland. And unless and until we come up with the answer around that, that may serve to provide political amnesties for protesters who were out rioting or protesters who were out demonstrating against flags being taken down, then this is just going to continue and it's going to come up again and again and again. So this conversation today and continuing conversations are absolutely crucial to us defining a way in how we deal with our past in such a way that people feel confident enough that they don't take to the streets to protest about a flag being taken down.
Is it Danny your name, sorry? Barry. Pick up on Barry's point about what I took out of it was state centricity. I mean, the reality is, and it's something that I would stress in particular when I'm doing talks to groups from the unionist loyalist community, because political unionism in particular is the sector of our society that has set its face against some kind of truth recovery process broadly. The two principal parties from the nationalist community, Sinn Féin and the SDLP, are broadly in favour. And I think when you try to unpick, so why is that, what's going on there, because as you rightly say, the non-state actors, parking the issue of collusion, non-state actors are responsible for 90% of the deaths, and within that, Republicans were responsible for the greatest proportion of the non-state actors. So if you're an outsider and you land from Mars in this part of the world, you think, well, politically, why is this the people who, on the face of it, would appear to have the most to lose in terms of having been responsible for, leaving aside the structural issues for a moment, for actual deaths during the conflict, is republicanism. So why? And it's quite a complex issue to unpick. And I think one of the elements to that is that to date, a lot of the ways in which we have done truth recovery in the mosaic of mechanisms that we've had, a lot of which we've heard about today, have been state-focused. So the public inquiries, for example, which set the tone of a state-focused approach to dealing with the past, the work of the police ombudsman, I guess, which is the other large one, these are state-focused mechanisms. And I was involved with Dawn and others in a Healing to Remembrance project where we looked at options for dealing with the past. This issue would always come up about political unionism and sections of loyalism and its difficulties with dealing with the past. And we would always say, well, the reality is, if the draw the line in the sand, draw a line under the past, let's do nothing else. What that means is do nothing new. What that really means is the state-centric approaches, which are part of the mosaic, continue, and then that continues to set the tone that this is all about, inverted commas, Brit bashing. This is all about state bashing. And so it's but the reality is, unless we have an overarching mechanism which brings in all of the actors, state and non-state actors, and looks at the things that Michael raised earlier on, the structural causes of conflict. Unless we have that kind of mechanism, the mosaic continues, and the state centricity of elements of that mosaic continue, and then, which in turn continues to look like this is all about bash. It's a complex. That's a very complex answer, but it's a complex question. So, for me, so one here, Michael, and then Alex, and then Paul.
I was reminded earlier, I also agree with it, that maybe it's the structure of the day or the title for the day. There's no non-anti-state-ish voices being raised here. There's nobody condemning Republicans for their actions in the past and stuff. The critique here coming out mostly today is against the state. I referred earlier to that I thought people might be a bit uncomfortable about that. But and it is true that I'm surprised at the lack. This is what next. Maybe need to have one of these for people who give another perspective. Because in the main, people here are verbalising what has been wrong with the structures of the state. We haven't had too much constructive then as a result of there's been critique, but there hasn't been much offered. I mean, personally, I was very disappointed when Boris said, can't really do anything about the recommendations coming out of Stevens. Well, hello, who can? I mean, where are we in the state of things? Is that just an option, or is that a legal bind on him not to do that? To me, they would have been interesting to draw out, for conversation. But to a degree, again, that's still sort of, and I'm not verbalising this but it's anti-state. It's anti-state structures. The other thing that I wish to say is that, and once again, it came out in conversation today, we haven't really looked to, and then what? It says here, what next? But we've only sort of about 15 minutes left about what next for our futures to say about the legal systems and stuff. But I would like just to put my last comment on it. I've been quite disappointed at the lack of what I've heard of ability of people who I thought were very powerful people in this society to do anything.
Okay. Alex here at the front, Rachel, and then there's Paul behind.
Hello. Yeah, this is a question, I think, for Kieran and Louise, I think, mostly. So it's sort of from a comparative perspective about truth-telling schemes. So we've kind of, coming out of today, and especially in the last exchange here, there seem to be problems or limitations with this kind of mosaic tapestry of truth-telling, kind of more ad hoc type of scheme that's taking place here. So I'd like to kind of turn the question around really though and see, is there anything, do you think, that's beneficial about that as opposed to a more unified, comprehensive process? So is there anything that's been any good that's come out of the process, the scattered array of processes here, that might not have been possible had Northern Ireland adopted a more streamlined, comprehensive scheme.
Okay. Paul? Just there.
Thanks. Two things. One, I want to totally agree with Bill's suggestion. I think it's an excellent idea of maybe, addressing that issue of Bradley Eames again and going to people that have influence and seeing is it possible to get a number of people to begin to sign up to that idea. We should look at it again. Why not? Why not go back? There hasn't been something better being put on the table. The other thing is I wanted to address some of the comments were made by Barry, and I'm reflecting, if I was a unionist sitting here today, I'd also think, why this concentration on the state? Look at the number of deaths, who was responsible, what about the IRA, what about the bombing campaign and what happened along the border and so on. I do think it's important maybe we begin that discussion of why people do that and why, for instance, why were people here today talking about McGurk's Bar? And the reason they're doing that, and the reason that McGurk's, it's not worse, but it's different than Enniskillen, Birmingham, Claudy and other atrocities. The reason it's different is because the people that died were blamed for the bombing. It was stated by the government, by the army, by the police, that the bombers were to be found among the dead, which left a terrible legacy for those that died in McGurk's. And it took many, many years to overturn that. And when we did finally get it overturned last year, for the first time ever, the Chief Constable rejected the report of the Police Ombudsman, and that again increased the hurt. Why was Bloody Sunday on the agenda for so long? And what about the other atrocities? Bloody Sunday was on the agenda because the people were told that their loved ones were nail bombers and gunmen and so on. And so for everyone that's ever been killed by the British Army, Ballymurphy and in all other incidents, they've always been told that they were either bombers, gunmen, nail bombers, petrol bombers, whatever, but that they were to blame for their own deaths. That is the vital difference, in that if you go to other families who've had someone murdered by the IRA, the word murdered always applied. It was described as a murder on television that night. It was investigated as a murder, and no one blamed the victim. Whereas in the case where the army were responsible, the people themselves were blamed. And that left a terrible legacy, and it was a point I was making privately to Kieran today. There was another amnesty in effect here, a de facto amnesty over the last 40 years, that applied to the British Army, and that everyone went to great lengths to ensure that they did not face prosecution. In the few cases where they were prosecuted and received life sentences, it was 4 cases. 4 cases only, and in those 4 cases, although they received life sentences, all 4 soldiers were released within 3 years and readmitted to the British Army. One of them is today serving in Iraq. That leaves a legacy for people.
Okay. Are there any other comments or questions? I'm conscious I keep looking to my left, so I'd like to bring in the right wing, bring in the right down there. My right.
Hello, I'm Brigitte Anton. I'm a member of the Labour Party in Northern Ireland, but I'm also German. And actually that's why I came here, because Germany had to go through truth recovery and dealing with the past now for a long, long time. And it actually had to do it twice in relation to East Germany as well. And listening to this, I could see quite a lot of parallels and also realize it is a long process. I think sometimes people here expect a lot, and a lot has to be done, but it is a long, long process. And it won't go away within the next 10 years. And the next generation, like my generation in Germany, will ask different questions, and we'll come back to it. But on the other hand, of course, you want to deal with the present and you want to deal with the future. So my question is actually to the panel, also in light of the present situation and people with austerity and people struggling with poverty and low income. What would you recommend to the politicians and to decision makers? How to balance dealing with the past with dealing with the present, because it's connected. And where do we go to next? Because otherwise the past will always hold us back. And from the discussions here, for me, it became more and more obvious that a lot of the decisions are political decisions. That, you know, when you talk about the legal system, you say you don't make the decisions. The laws are made, and the laws are made by politicians. So, what would you recommend? For people like you who work in the legal system and with the law, what would you recommend is the next step? Thank you.
Any other down that side of the house? I'm also particularly conscious that in this section we're looking for the what next, and part of that, as I say, we've got 6 months to run on this project. If you have specific pieces of work that are related to this, dealing with the past issue, you can either flag them publicly now or else drop them in your suggestions box. But we've picked up, as we've gone along, different specific pieces of work. We can write papers, we can put them on our website, we can set them out in blogs and stuff. So if you have little things, little bits of work that you think that we might have the skill set to deliver on, either talk about them now or else let us know privately. How do you want to handle answering some of these?
That's the last one.
Okay,
Alex's.
go for it.
I think I'll start with Alex's first about the what perhaps are the strengths of our current mosaic or piecemeal approach to truth recovery. And I think it's interesting because I was trying to think through what the strengths could be, and everything that I thought of as a strength could also be viewed perhaps as a challenge. But I think one of the stronger points is that currently a lot of the individual cases are being reviewed by the various mechanisms. If we, in other contexts where they've had a wholesale truth recovery process, demand for that process generally always outstrips expectations. Thousands of victims often apply and the commissions can't deal with it. They can't process everybody's testimony, so only a small fraction of voices get to go and meet the commissioner, get to tell their stories. And here, with all the problems and all the different complications in recent years, most people have been able to interact with one process, if not several. I think another strength perhaps here is the amount of time and resources that have been devoted to dealing with the past so far. Obviously, there is still many issues that we haven't thought of, but a lot of money has been spent on things like public inquiries and human resources, which other communities would not have been able to manage. And it's not done yet. You know, I think I was quite struck today listening to Jeff's presentation on the Commission for the Location of Victims' Remains, how open-ended that process might be, the fact that they could still be in many years' time getting information. So I think that's something that is in stark contrast to truth recovery processes in other countries. International standards and how long a truth commission should last would often say 5 years tops or 2 years tops. And so something here that the idea that this conversation could evolve and could change and be responsive to new information coming to light is perhaps a positive. And also perhaps the focus on retaining the possibility of prosecution does give higher evidential standards. In other contexts where there are just truth commissions, offenders come and tell their stories, perhaps it's not fully corroborated or challenged sufficiently, or victims tell their stories, but it's not really sewn up into a broader narrative. But here, the idea that there is kind of clear standards about what the quality of the information should be is perhaps a strength. On the last question, I think you're absolutely right that the past does impact on the present. Something we see in all post-conflict societies, and it can impact on them in many ways. With reference to the economic and social rights, I think it's striking that the areas with the highest rates of victimisation during the Troubles are the areas of Northern Ireland today with some of the greatest socioeconomic problems, so there is a very clear link. In terms of how laws are made and how different people's voices could be heard, it's obviously a difficult process, and here I think in Northern Ireland where we've had a lot of consultations endlessly, so that's meant to be one avenue that would be used to hear different voices. I think in other situations, things like referendums on issues to deal with the past have been used, or engaging in a variety of consultation meetings where politicians or different actors go to different communities and speak to them about their issues or hold focus groups. So there are a number of different mechanisms. The extent to which the consultation is then responded to, I think, often seems to be the challenge.
Gordon, you want to come in?
Yeah, is it Michael? Yeah, Michael, I just want to address your comment where you said that the thrust of the days tended to be anti-state. I didn't really notice that until you said it. Well, I sort of had, but I didn't. But I think it's important to emphasise that the project itself, and the emphasis on amnesties, it is meant to look at all actors in the Northern Ireland conflict and questions of amnesties, whether it's for soldiers or paramilitaries or whatever. And I suspect that if we'd had different speakers along today, we might have had different questioning. But if we take people who hold key posts within the state and put them on the stage, the questions are inevitably going to be towards them. And let's face it, we all like to have a bit of a row, so they're all going to be a little bit critical of the people who are there. So if we'd had perhaps the justice and security spokespersons for the different political parties here, it might have come across slightly differently, perhaps. The project's not intended to be anti-state. It's intended to look at the state and non-state actors and use of violence by those groupings.
Thanks, Kieran. I'm going to try and talk to Bill's question, Michael's and Paul's, and then come back to sort of dealing with the past, dealing with the present. I think for me today, in that sense of frustration, what I heard was a definitive need coming from people that has been unmet by the criminal justice agencies and those agencies that are tasked at the minute with investigating and dealing with the past. So there's requests for information, requests for data, requests for answers, requests for investigations. And what was clear from the Attorney General, the Police Ombudsman, the HET, and the PPS is that they can only do things within their own remits, which Bill was talking about, their own silos. So even all together, they're not able to answer those questions and that need that still remains within our society. So they were actually putting the onus back on the political leaders to address this gap and to do something about it. So, for example, the Attorney General said the Assembly has the capacity to legislate for a stay in prosecution. So it seems that there's what today has exposed for me is that tapestry, if you like, of truth recovery mechanisms that are currently there, that are state-run, are insufficient to deal with all the questions and all the needs and wants that are out there. And that brings us back really to how do we do that? How do we deal with our past and dealing with our past in terms of dealing with the present? Our past is our present. It's day and daily now for all of us. Open a newspaper, turn on the radio, and that need is there, whether it's in relation to historical cases or whether it's in relation to what's happening on our streets. And the whole issue around what's happening with our economy, what's happening in terms of social and economic justice within those most deprived communities. So these are issues that we're all having to deal with on a day and daily basis. And for me, today was about, and I know, Michael, you said it seemed to come across as anti-state, but for me, today was about all those agencies who are tasked with those current processes and whether those processes can deliver. What's stark for me is that they can't. They can't deliver on their own. They can't deliver individually, and they can't deliver collectively. So, for me, dealing with the past is about creating something more. Is it Ames Bradley? I'm not sure, Bill, and I'm not sure that if Ames Bradley was dusted off, that all those agencies would be running to sign up to it. But let's give it a chance. Let's get it off the shelf where it's been sitting, gathering dust from the consultations come in, because certainly it would be a starting point for all those agencies to engage with, because again, from all those state agencies today, I've heard there's a need for them. They know that they're only a small part of this jigsaw, and they see that there's a need for something else.
Luke, did you want to comment?
Yeah, just a few points with Paul, and come back to Barry, and just kind of sum up all the things that's been said. I'll just make 3 brief points. The first one is the reason why we've got the organisations we have at the moment is because of the Article 2 compliance issue, and it's obviously state focused because the state has obligations on the European Convention to do these things, and the Attorney General went through this morning about the cases that have come about, like the Jordan case. The second problem is that non-state actors aren't bound by these obligations. It's only the state, because often the state doesn't want to recognise the legitimacy of these organisations, and the second thing is these organisations can't carry out effective investigations. And so what we've got at the moment is because we're obligated to internationally under human rights law, rather than because there's any political will locally. The second thing is, and it's picking up on Paul's point, is about this issue of victimisation and sort of secondary victimisation in which victims have suffered because their interaction with the state or through criminal justice organisations, which still seems to be happening when it comes to issues or reports with McGurks and different things. But we heard with Jeff and with Dave that there's family liaison officers who are supposed to ensure that this doesn't happen anymore. And I think any part of a process about truth recovery has to be very sensitive to victims' needs. It has to, on one hand, acknowledge them, but also allow their participation, ensure that they're effectively heard and their interests considered. And the third thing is, it's kind of bringing all the points together, is the process we've got at the moment of a criminal justice process. The criminal trial is very limited as to what sort of truth is going to come out. I heard the Director of Public Prosecution saying about the limits of evidence. If there's no evidence, there's no case, and therefore justice is very much connected to what sort of truth is going to come out. And sadly in Northern Ireland, because there's been so few cases that have come out of the Historic Inquiries team, there's been a very limited outcome of truth which has happened in a more public form. And maybe a more wider truth process which can look at not just at the individual case where there's evidence, but the whole context, and maybe more fruitful at giving victims acknowledgement where their perpetrators haven't been found and different issues. And that's something that we all need to consider as we move forward.
Okay. Any final comments or questions? Or sorry, Patricia. You're getting the last word here, Patricia.
Yeah, I'm just going back to the question over here about, what is the benefit or the benefits of our mosaic of processes. And I think, Louise touched on it, it individualises cases. And I think that's its strength, but its weakness. It doesn't look at policies, it doesn't look at patterns, it doesn't look at the causes of the conflict. So it doesn't look at all those broader issues. I also want to comment on the de facto amnesty. I think we have had a de facto amnesty, but I think that the processes at present are not challenging that de facto amnesty that existed.
Okay. I think that's probably us. I wanted also to pick up on Alex's point as a final comment, the strengths and weaknesses of our mosaic as compared to an overarching process. I mean, the impetus towards truth is moral in terms of victims having a moral right, at least, to truth, to know what happened. Legal, we've talked a lot about Article 2. But for me, there's also a political imperative. And I think the political imperative in the local context is there are some cynics within our political establishment who sort of say, and you'll have these private conversations, you've probably had these conversations with them as well, who kind of say, well, things are trundling along. Things are trundling along. Okay, some victims are not happy, but we have devolution. We have a local version of democracy. Things are trundling along. And for me, this is where I came to this probably pretty agnostic. I wasn't persuaded of the urge to truth to begin with, but during the process, particularly having been involved with Healing to Remembering, actually, I came around to the view for these reasons, moral, legal, and political. And the political impetus is this, that if you don't have a place to locate this, if you don't have a central institution a la Eames Bradley's recommendations, if you don't have a place to put it, then there's always a danger that the process could be destabilised politically, that events, dear boy, I think as a famous British politician once suggested, come up. And if you haven't got a place to manage that in a context like ours, it could bring the whole house of cards down. So I think that's the big weakness for me in terms of the mosaic. Without having the central institution to manage this process as a key part of our transition, the whole house of cards could tumble through events. Through something comes up in a HET, something comes up, and you could have the whole house of cards tumbling as a result of it. And that fundamental political instability, as well as the moral and legal ones, for me, is a compelling reason for truth. Okay. It leaves me now to stress again, I really would appreciate it, folks, if you took 2 minutes to fill in those wee evaluation forms. I think Luke has left a wee box just outside, so you can either leave it on your table, we'll collect them, or else drop them in the wee box just outside. I want to thank a number of people who've worked extremely hard on pulling this all together. Elaine at the Transitional Justice Institute, and Declan, who works in the School of Law. Connor and Rich, our guys at the back here, who kept the whole thing ticking over from a tech point of view. The staff at the Europa, Emer and Sarah at Healing to Remembering. Rachel, Shannon, and Lauren, our floating mics, our registers, people who, these are the people who make everything tick. And finally, Luke. Luke, who has done the bulk of the work in putting all of this together. We just had to show up and kind of do a spiel, but Luke did all the work. So if you wouldn't mind expressing your appreciation in the usual fashion. Thank you.